Janis Joplin left behind many unforgettable songs, but one of the most haunting things she ever left behind was silence. A band was ready, a studio was waiting, a microphone stood in place for her voice, but Janis never came back to finish the song. And somehow that silence became one of the saddest parts of her legacy. Janis Joplin built her life around sound. Not polished sound, not careful sound, not the kind of voice that asks permission before it enters a room. Her voice cracked, it screamed, it reached, it bled. It sounded like someone trying to turn pain into something survivable. That is why people believed her. Because Janis never sounded protected. She sounded exposed. And by 1970, that voice was working its way toward what would become one of the greatest albums of her life, Pearl. There was something different about that period. Janis was still Janis, still loud, still funny, still emotionally reckless, still impossible to ignore. But there was also a growing sense that her music was becoming more focused, more precise, more dangerous in a quieter way. She was no longer just exploding. She was shaping the explosion. And inside those sessions was a song with a title that already sounded haunting before anyone could know how haunting it would become. Buried Alive in the Blues. Even the name feels eerie now. Too eerie. Like fate had left fingerprints on the tape before the story was over. The full Tilt Boogie Band had recorded the instrumental track. The groove was there, the arrangement was there, the structure was there. Everything was waiting for the one thing that could make it whole. Janis. She was supposed to come in and record the vocal. That was the plan. Simple. Ordinary. One more day in the studio. One more take. One more song. Nobody in that room knew they were standing beside a silence that would outlive all of them. That is the cruelty of unfinished things. When they are still unfinished, they look temporary, a delay, a tomorrow problem, something you assume life will return to. But sometimes tomorrow never arrives. And in Janis Joplin's story, one unfinished song became a wound. Because her whole life had been built around saying the unsayable, and now there was a song waiting for the one voice that would never come. There is something deeply painful about the last ordinary night of a life. Not the dramatic version, not the myth, not the headlines people write later. The ordinary part. The part where the person is still expected somewhere, still on the schedule, still part of tomorrow. Janis was not supposed to become an absence that night. She was supposed to return. That is what makes the story of Buried Alive in the Blues so emotionally devastating. The song was not abandoned because nobody cared. It was not abandoned because the band gave up on it. It was abandoned because the person the song was waiting for disappeared from the future without warning. And Janis had always lived close to that edge. That was part of her force. She did not perform like someone safely observing life. She performed like someone being burned by it in real time. People saw the wildness, the beads, the bottle, the laugh, the reckless freedom. But underneath all of that was a woman who was often unbearably lonely. That loneliness is important, because Janis did not just sing pain, she carried it. And maybe that is why unfinished songs feel so intimate in her story. Because Janis herself always felt unfinished somehow. Still looking for love, still trying to be fully seen, still trying to give enough of herself to a crowd that she might finally quiet whatever ache followed her back to the hotel room when the lights went out. The night before the vocals should have been recorded, the song still belonged to the future. The band could hear it in their heads. The producers could imagine the take. Janis herself likely could too. That is what makes it tragic. This was not an impossible dream. It was a nearly completed reality. The microphone was not waiting for a miracle. It was waiting for a woman expected to walk through the door. But she never did. And suddenly, a song called "Buried Alive in the Blues" stopped sounding like a title. It started sounding like an epitaph. When Janis Joplin died, the grief was not only for the woman, it was also for the voice. Because voices are strange things. A person dies once, but a voice feels like it should keep going, especially a voice like Janis's. It was too alive to imagine it ending, too raw, too human, too hungry, too recognizable. It did not seem built for silence. And yet silence is exactly what remained in the place where her vocals should have been. The band had the track, they had the music, they had the shape of the song, but they did not have Janis. And there is no substitute for Janis Joplin in a Janis Joplin song. That is the unbearable truth. Nobody could step in. Nobody could imitate what she would have done. Nobody could finish it in any real way. Because the missing piece was not technical, it was spiritual. What Buried Alive in the Blues needed was not just a singer. It needed Janis's history, Janis's pain, Janis's reckless emotional honesty, Janis's way of leaning into a lyric as if she was not interpreting it, but confessing it. Without that, the song remained open, a wound left exposed. And so the decision was made to leave it as it was, instrumental, unfinished, waiting forever. That may have been the most respectful choice, and also the saddest. Because every second of that track reminds you of the one thing it does not contain: the voice. Janis spent her life forcing people to hear what hurt. And now one of the most haunting artifacts she left behind is a song defined by what cannot be heard. There is something almost sacred in that emptiness. The band plays, the groove moves forward, the structure holds. But at the center of it all is a ghost-shaped silence, not literal, not theatrical. Just absence, pure absence. And maybe that is what makes the song so powerful. It does not merely tell you Janis is gone, it makes you feel the exact shape of the space she left behind. Now imagine the scene, not as a strict historical document, but as the emotional truth of what that unfinished song means. A stage. The band under soft light, the instruments ready, the drums counting in, the guitar opening the song, the bass moving underneath it. Everything exactly where it should be, except Janis. Her microphone stands empty at center stage. No one walks toward it. No one takes her place. And in the crowd, something unusual begins to happen. People are holding framed photographs of Janis Joplin, some close to their chest, some lifted in the air, some with tears in their eyes, some singing before the song has even fully begun, as if they already know what is coming. The band keeps playing, and the audience understands. Janis is not here. so the room will have to carry her. At first, the singing is soft, not polished, not perfect, just human. A few voices, then more, then hundreds, then thousands. The part Janis never got to sing begins to rise out of the crowd instead. Not because anyone believes they can replace her. They can't. That is not the point. The point is that Janis gave them her voice for so long that now, in her absence, they are trying to return something. A chorus of grief, a chorus of gratitude, a chorus of ordinary people singing badly, honestly, emotionally, which is perhaps the most Janis Joplin thing imaginable. And somewhere inside that moment, the song changes meaning. It is no longer only the song Janis never finished. It becomes the song the audience finished for her. Not in the studio, not on the album, but in spirit, in love, in memory, in that trembling moment when the band plays on and the crowd refuses to let silence have the last word. Some hold up Janis's framed photo as if it were a candle. Some sing with their eyes closed. Some look at the empty mic stand the way people look at a place where someone should still be standing. And the strangest part is this: she does not feel completely absent. Because that is what great voices do. They leave the body, but not the room. The band is playing here. The crowd is singing here. But Janis feels like she is arriving from somewhere else. From memory. From tape hiss. From old speakers. From the cracked edge of every song she ever screamed into life. It feels, for one impossible moment, as if she has joined from a distance, not fully seen, not fully heard, but present in the only way a dead singer can still be present, through the people who cannot stop carrying her voice inside them. And maybe that is the final heartbreak of Buried Alive in the Blues. Janis never recorded the vocal, but in another sense, maybe she never stopped singing it. Maybe the crowd became the echo. Maybe the silence became the invitation. Maybe the missing voice forced everyone who loved her to realize that grief itself can sing. The band finishes the song. The crowd is still holding the frames. The mic stand is still empty. And nobody in the room mistakes that emptiness for nothing. Because sometimes the loudest part of a story is the place where the voice should have been. That is why Buried Alive in the Blues remains one of the saddest pieces of Janis Joplin's legacy. Not because it failed, not because it was broken, but because it was left waiting. Waiting for a voice that had already given the world everything it had. Janis Joplin spent her life singing as if silence itself were the enemy. And then, in the end, she left behind a song defined by silence. Maybe that is why it hurts so much. Because the track reminds us that death does not only take the person. Sometimes it takes the next line, the next take, the next day, the next unfinished thought. And yet, there is something beautiful in that too. Because the song still exists, the band still plays, the tape still turns, and the absence inside it has become its own kind of truth. Buried Alive in the Blues is not simply the song Janis never finished. It is the sound of how much she was still expected, how much more people believed was coming, how impossible it felt that a voice so alive could suddenly be gone. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just tell the stories of legends. We tell the unfinished moments that made them unforgettable. And if you had to choose, what is the saddest part of Janis Joplin's story? The voice, the loneliness, or the silence she left behind? Because maybe, in Janis's case, all three were always singing together.